Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the show. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and I'm so excited to talk about one of the hottest topics in the industry today, folks, agentic AI. We're going to talk about getting prepared, future-proofing your data for agentic AI, or one of my favorite ways to describe it is get your data house in order. AI is extremely powerful, but it needs data to perform efficiently. It needs good quality data and it needs a lot of good quality data. So whether you're training a model yourself or building out a RAG model, for example, or a graph RAG, which I think is some pretty interesting stuff. However it is that you're going to leverage AI, it wants data. It wants high quality, good, trusted, certified data. That is going to be the topic of our discussion today and our show, Future Proof Your Data for Agentic AI. And what an all-star cast, folks, we have here. I'm going to go around the room and introduce our friends. First, Manny Gill, fairly new to Boomi, former SAP, former Microsoft. Excited to be hitting the ground running. Boomi World, of course, is next week in Dallas. If you're able to come to that, come to that. But Manny, welcome to the show. Tell us real quick a bit about yourself and what you're excited about with Boomi.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Eric, and great to be here. Um, I work on the product team. I look after data and AI. I think of data as kind of the AI as the tip of the spear, and data definitely the wood behind that arrow. So we need to get the data right,
Ooh.
data in a way that we can use in our AI projects.
I love that analogy. I'm going to steal that one for sure. Data is the wood behind the arrow. That is pretty cool stuff. Ariel Perolis, you also are relatively new, not super new, but came from the Rivery side, now part of Boomi. What are you excited about as Boomi World approaches?
Yeah, lots. Hi everyone, nice to be here. Yeah, as you mentioned, they joined Boomi recently as part of the acquisition of Rivery. As you know, the Rivery world was mostly around the data pipelines. Now with Boomi, it's really expanding quite a bit to a feeding, as Manny mentioned, not just the targets, but actually other workflows such as agentic AI workflows. So really excited about some of the announcement that they will be sharing next week.
Yeah, I've been tracking enterprise software, I'm afraid to admit for how long? 35 years. Yeah, it's been about 35 years. I've been watching this stuff and I've never seen a pace of innovation like we're seeing right now today. I mean, and I kind of predicted this late last year. I said we're about to enter, or we are entering a period of hyper accelerated innovation. And boy, that is not to have been untrue as we see all these things, agentic in particular. And last but not least, Jason Proto from RSM, the fifth largest accounting firm. You've heard about the big four. They're number five. So welcome to the show. Dialing in from Cincinnati, baby, in the Rust Belt. Tell us about yourself and what you're excited about.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having us here. So I'm a principal at RSM, and my team partners with Boomi and Rivery to do data pipelines and integrations. And we are helping our clients in the middle market, which is where we kind of sit, clients between about 100 million in revenue all the way up to 5 billion, on their AI journeys and setting up their data so that they can get the best analysis and models and insights from their data to help them run their businesses. So real excited to be here on this show today.
Well, and let's get right to it, folks. So, for some history, DM Radio is now in its 18th year, so we've been doing this a pretty long time. And I remember, and Manny, I'll throw this first one over at you. I remember back as far back as 2008 and 2009, and I had really gotten into the BI industry back in '01. So business intelligence, data warehousing, ETL. I kind of understood the whole concept and the basic tenets, if you will, of data warehousing and the value. And early in the game, I thought to myself, this ETL going around and around and around and around, like someone has got to stop this madness or at least be able to orchestrate things better. Now, I can't say I used that word, but I'll use it today in context because I realized that there's so much data movement going on. Of course, what happens is people figured out, hey, this data warehouse is pretty cool. I want to get my data in there as well. So now you're hitting batch window after batch window, and it used to be overnight, then it was all day long, 24/7 batch windows loading data in. There has to be a better way. Of course, there was data virtualization. ELT came along, extract, load, transform, load it into the cloud, for example. But data orchestration, to me, really does represent a significant maturation of this industry. So, from your perspective, how big a deal is data orchestration for AI, for fueling AI initiatives?
Yeah, great question, Eric. And you brought me back to my BI days as well. I started my career as an engineer at Crystal, if you remember a product called Crystal
Oh my
Reports.
goodness, I sure do.
Yeah. And went on a journey, Crystal Reports to business objects to SAP, delivering business intelligence as well as what we called enterprise information management. So everything from data governance to ETL to master data management solutions. The the way I see it today, and at Boomi, we will be announcing the release of our what we're calling the Agent Studio, which allows you to design, govern, and orchestrate agents, right? And so your question is around orchestration around data, and I think that while business intelligence required an individual operations person or a business user to get access to data, in this case, we're really talking about agents, and the types of data that they need is, goes from, hey, what's the answer, the question that I need to answer, to the context that I need. And so in this context, orchestration becomes even more important, but it also becomes focused, right? Whereas in the analytics world, hey, let's set up this, a nice data warehouse that has all the tables, is cleansed, et cetera, it's got the right schemas. Where from an orchestration perspective, we need to focus on is getting the right data pipeline. So whether it's, hey, we've got to bring these sources together and allow the agents to be able to get context to that data, or it's, hey, we've got these prompts and then we've got to store that as memory so that the agents can continuously learn and get better and provide value to customers. So I think the orchestration question just changes, but it becomes very much more focused on the problem that we're trying to solve with the agents.
Right. And, obviously we've wanted to leverage data for years now. That's nothing new. But I think the reminder I keep throwing out to our audience is to recognize, look, this AI stuff, it is very powerful. Of course, Gen AI is taking the world by storm. It's very powerful, but don't think that all the other practices of yesteryear go out the window. No, in fact, they're more important now, I'd say, than ever. Right? Right, Manny?
Yeah, totally. We tend to think of them as deterministic processes versus probabilistic, and they're both important, right? And I also look at the agentic world as just adding a layer on top where we can automate things more. We can, make some of the stuff that we're trying to do more efficient, but we're still trying to make decisions with analytic data, trying to run our businesses, make them more efficient. So I definitely, I used this analogy the other day, or at least I thought about this, which was, hey, we were in a position where we were digitally transforming our environments in the early 2000s, right? But then this unfortunate event happened called COVID, and it was a moment in time, right, that forced us essentially to accelerate these projects, right? And I feel like AI is a catalyst for that as it specifically relates to data. We have the data, and we always say, hey, it could be clean, it could be better organized. And now I believe the agentic kind of opportunity is a catalyst to accelerate that.
Right. And acceleration is exactly what we're seeing out there. But again, might want to tap the brakes a little bit, folks. Just make sure you're ready to go down that road. That's what we're talking about, future-proofing your data. And Jason, I'll throw this one, or actually, Ariel, I'll bring you into the conversation now. Data orchestration again. It's encompassing all these methods. We have ETL, we have ELT, we have data virtualization, master data management. All of that fits within the realm of data orchestration. What are your thoughts about how this should serve as a call to action for data engineers, for data managers, for CDOs to prepare for agentic AI, all of our traditional workflows? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, you talked about the pace of innovation earlier in the conversation. It's the shift from ETL to ELT was a huge shift, but now
Right.
now we keep on accelerating. You mentioned different modes as data streaming as well that you didn't mention. That is another kind of mode that needs to be handled. Essentially, what we see is, I think, in the modern data workflows and advancement in the way we can set up our data pipelines and orchestrate processes. But at the same time, much more complexity around those data pipelines. They involve many more data sources, different data types. They involve different data volumes, often much larger than before, as well as different refresh rates that we need to incorporate. So all of that really increases the importance of orchestration. The way we handle that complexity is by throwing a lot of capabilities and solutions which are easier to use, but there are really different components that comes together as part of the data pipeline. And so being able to stitch them together or glue those processes together with the right orchestration mechanism is critical. And I think the other part that is as important, and agentic AI, as Manny mentioned, is part of it, is really trying to help us automate processes. And so how we activate data, either whether using reverse ETL or really operationalizing it with AI agents that are able to take decisions for us. Again, this is something that orchestration needs to handle. And so for me, what's important when we think about those modern data workflows and how orchestration plays in that is really the ability to not just create the dependency management and ensure that the workflows and activities are following each other, but also being able to oversee them and have the connectivity from an observability or a management perspective as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up reverse ETL. One of the cool ways I've heard to describe that is hydrating your applications. I mean, we spend all this time and money pulling data from operational systems into the warehouse to certify it, to cleanse it, to get it pristine for use with analysis and decision making. And if you hydrate your applications with all that cleansed data, now you've moved the value out to that whole application landscape, right?
Exactly, and I think that's something that Boomi has been doing for years with the iPaaS approach that was quite innovative when Boomi started. But then the complexity around the way that data needs to be treated before it's being activated and hydrating by the operational systems increased, and that's where again the orchestration comes into play, where you're now able to maybe do so across multiple systems at once, and then synchronize all those applications together and make sure that you have maybe the right data quality rules in between, and ensuring data consistency that way.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'll throw this question over to Jason Proto of RSM. This all sounds great, but guess what? There are always bottlenecks. There are always gotchas, and a lot of that stuff, to be candid, over the years we've kind of swept under the rug and just moved on and gone with something that did work. There wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to tying all the loose ends. I guess what I'm trying to say. We've kind of swept a lot of stuff under the rug and pretended that's not a problem. It is a problem, and we have to fix that now, I think, as best we can as we leapfrog into this next age. What's your take on common bottlenecks? Where do you see the problems when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, I think we can break it up into two different areas. So one is really in the infrastructure itself. That includes things like access to applications to onboard the data into whatever your data repositories that are being used for AI. It could be security protocols, like maybe you have PII on some of the columns of data in your databases that you're looking at. So what are the protocols to kind of mask those things? And then what about latency issues? Even with an iPaaS solution, do you have the right bandwidth to be able to bring on more data? So you really need to think about the infrastructure and the way that you're orchestrating all of these data pipelines when you're building them out and how scalable they are. And then the second part that we want to look at is really the data itself, right? Do you have a data governance program? Are you bringing in bad data? Because let's say you have really good models that are tested and they're meeting all of your expectations and they're risk averse and all of those kinds of things. And then you onboard a new system or you bring a new data set in, and now all of a sudden you're skewing your data, right? And maybe you're getting drift, maybe you're getting bad language models, duplication, those kinds of things. So one of the bottlenecks is that now you have to stop that agent from working and you have to go back and retune or clean up that data. And so that kind of like stops the flow and usability of the data that you're putting into your AI agents or your other AI models. One place that we really see this is in the private equity space. Because when you're doing mergers and acquisitions, a lot of times you're either onboarding a lot of new data sets or you're bringing in new applications. So you have all of these things that you have to worry about. So you really have to think about, do you have a plan to overcome all of these bottlenecks? And are you doing things like benchmark testing of your current pipelines? And with Boomi and Rivery, we're able to set up some of the guardrails and the visibility into that to make sure that as we scale, we're able to kind of uncork those bottlenecks.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. And I'm going to throw an observation over to you from one of my best friends in the business, a guy, Donald Farmer. You may know him well, Tree Hive Consulting. He's a former software guy. He was at Click for a long time. He's been in a couple different places, but very, very wise and very deep thinker. And he made this really excellent point one day that, exploring data and playing around with data as you're loading it, as you're building pipelines, that is a huge part of the process. That is part of the analytical process, is understanding the data, getting your hands dirty a little bit, playing around with it. So that's not wasted time. That is part of the analysis, is preparing the data pipelines, figuring out how it's all going to come together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that governance piece, right? You really need to have a good governance structure and visibility into what your data looks like, and always be making sure that you have oversight, and data stewards and owners that are able to access it and really understand what's going on in your data universe.
Yeah, and I'm glad you threw that term out there, the data steward. We got our first break coming up here in just about 30 seconds or so. But to me, the data steward is one of the most important people in the organization, because that person needs to understand the business and the data and the systems, the technology. It's really a liaison who can work with the business side to help them understand. Now, agentic AI and AI in general is really putting pressure on our old ways of doing things, and theoretically, it's going to really help us automate a lot of that stuff. We'll talk about that in the next segments on the show here. But stewards, really important people. You want to get good data stewards, folks. They're the linchpin that kind of holds it all together. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back, and you're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on the show. Yours truly, Eric Cavanaugh, with an all-star cast from Boomi and RSM. We're all getting ready to head down to Dallas for the big Boomi World. I love Boomi World. We went there last year. I've gone to several of these shows. They're always very, very interesting. And I have to say, Boomi and Steve Lucas and the whole team, they have the right idea. It was like almost 2 years ago, I think it's just a year, like 20 months ago, I ran into Steve Lucas at a hallway at one of these things, and I said, everyone's excited about Gen AI. What I'm more excited about is what I called interactive AI back then. And then some clever person came up with agentic AI. I'm like, yeah, that's the word. Interactive is a bit too bulky. It is agentic AI. And Boomi is focused squarely on building this out, a control tower, and really understanding how these agents work. But again, data. The data is important. So let's dive right back in here. And and I'll throw this one maybe over to Jason first, and then Manny, if you want to comment on it. The modern data stack. Now, I am a huge fan of technology. I geek out all the time on the new tools. I love it. When the modern data stack came out, I was like, that's great. And it was great, because now you have it's like this battle between best of breed and then platform, right? And best of breed comes along when the old ways of doing things are not quite as sharp as you want. And then eventually it all gets baked into a new platform, and there are benefits of going that route. But the modern data stack, I mean, geez, Louise, the amount of complexity that this brings into the equation, as you start to scale, that starts to cause some real issues. And that's when you start wondering, maybe we do want to consolidate a lot of these efforts. So we have the single pane of glass so we can see and orchestrate and govern. It's very hard to govern when you have multiple tools and multiple technologies and multiple access points. If you have one environment where you're doing these things, it's a lot easier to govern. But Jason, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks. To go back in the way back machine a little bit, I came from IT management. I started my career before consulting in IT management, and IT overhead is a problem, with every organization. And anytime you're adding organizational overhead and IT overhead, you're adding risk. It could be performance, it could be efficiency, it could be security risk when you're adding all of these systems in. So a unified platform is really going to cut down on the amount of overhead and allow IT organizations to kind of create better visibility into the data movement. because like you said, you're going to that one pane of glass, you're going to that one application, you're going to the one iPaaS solution, and everything is there and all of the coordination there. And if something is maybe going wrong or you're seeing bad performance, it could be like linked together, and you're going to be much better in the way that you can kind of block and tackle for things that are happening in your organization. We find that especially at clients in the middle market, they have very lean IT organizations, which means you have to find every way possible to be, more efficient in the ways that you're doing things. So, if you only have 2 or 3 people on your team that are doing all of your kind of like data ETL, data manipulation, data visualizations, those kinds of things, you really need to think about, how can I make their job easier and make it better for them and lessen those risks. So that's like one of the benefits of, Rivery joining up with Boomi, because now you have not only the data pipelines, but you have the API management, you have Data Hub, you have all of these things. I'm sure Manny can probably expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, Manny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pick it up there. I think absolutely. I think I think of unified platform. I also think open platform is just as important in that context. But you mentioned Steve, our CEO, 2 years ago. He saw this agentic future coming down the pipe. I think he was actually quoted first in the press using that terminology of agents. But that vision kind of led to an expansion of the Boomi capabilities, which started with iPaaS, and then on the platform we added a much richer data management capability, and that led to the acquisition of Rivery for analytic use cases, plus big data use cases around agentic, but also API management. And now, if you think about it, APIs are kind of the the energy that's feeding agents today, and being front-ended with MCP is a very popular protocol these days. But essentially, it's APIs behind the MCP protocol, and then obviously AI management, right? And so having all of these capabilities on a single platform provides value. And one word that Eric, I'm sure you is near and dear to you is lineage. And so imagine lineage, not just from the data perspective, but all the way to the agentic layer. And so how do you govern that? How do you understand what is this agent actually doing? Why did it make this decision? How do you audit that, right? And where did it get its data from? And that user context, that delegated authorization across. So not to say you couldn't do it with different platforms and stitching them together, but this workflow just becomes more and more complex. However, you need an open platform so that our control tower for agents, it supports any agent that you've built, whether it's in Salesforce or it's in Boomi or in AWS Bedrock, as an example. And so now you have a single control plane, a single pane of glass, where you can monitor the observability plus what's running in your environment, so you understand what the agents are doing, and where the data is coming from and how they're making their decisions, etc. So it definitely becomes important as the systems become more complex.
Yeah. Well, and also there's a timeliness aspect to this as well, right? I mean, we keep moving closer and closer to real time, as we've talked about. I mean, for context, the first article I ever wrote in this industry was in 2003 for a magazine called DM Review, and it was all about real-time data warehousing. Well, there wasn't a lot of real-time data warehousing back in 2003, but there's a lot of it today. And Manny, I'll throw this back over to you. These agents, they want real-time data. If you want to succeed in leveraging these amazing little creatures, you want them to get certified, trusted data, and you want it as fast as possible so that they understand the context right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to some degree there's that same balance that we had back in 2003, right? Where, hey, we needed historical information to do kind of trend analysis, et cetera. That still exists. But a lot of the use cases, as you mentioned, these agents are operationalizing, automating our business. And so they do need access to timely data. So I think of things like traditional things that we've delivered with machine learning, like supplier risk. Now with agents having real-time access to the news and the way the world is changing. So, use that ugly or most beautiful word in the dictionary starts with a capital T. But how that's influencing supply chains as an example, right? And what suppliers we choose as we're fulfilling orders and stuff. And so, that's agentic workflows. Those are agents that are replacing those workflows. So having access to timely data in real time is not just nice to have, but it's a core part of the scenario for sure.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with you. And there are market forces that are changing what we do. And now there's AI and agentic AI, and you just know that it is a driver. I mean, it's it's dominating conversations in boardrooms right now. But again, I caution folks that data is really, really important. And maybe Ariel, I'll throw this one over to you. Simplification is what we want, right? Complexity can be good for a while as you're trying out new things, as you're getting closer to the bleeding edge. But as soon as possible, you want to simplify what your systems are doing, what your people are doing. You don't want over complexity because that kind of it becomes its own sort of form of technical burden. That's another interesting concept Donald Farmer wrote about just the other day. There's technical debt and technical burden. And there are different things, right? Debt has to be paid, burden has to be endured, and complexity is a technical burden, right, Ariel?
Oh yeah, exactly. I think that connects very nicely what Jason mentioned earlier around kind of the lean teams and being able to support that. It's really, at the end of the day, it's not always very easy to show ROI with data and even with AI. Even though there's some amazing use cases out there, you really have to find the right use case that drives kind of the return on the investment. And so if that's so complex to achieve and that's so hard to maintain, obviously the investment cost goes up, and it's much harder to prove the value of it. So keeping things as simple as possible, and of course, there's different ways to achieve simplicity, but being able to still solve the complex use cases. I think that's what we try to do as a product vendor. That's a part of our value proposition. That was the case for us at Rivery before Boomi acquired us, but that aligned very nicely with kind of Boomi's values. And I think we've seen that over the years with data engineers turning to us and saying, yes, I can technically build, for example, my data pipeline using open source libraries for a certain process. We talked about real-time data being fed into those agentic AI workflows or even into AI models. It's a limit of how much data you can actually push into those AI models, even though the recent models are quite impressive in terms of the amount of data points it can actually gather. Still, there's limits to that. And so you really need to be efficient about the way data is being extracted and pulled into the system. That's why we invested quite a bit in a CDC engine that enables pulling just incremental data sets from the data source, introducing very little operational burden on that data source, and then pushing that very efficiently into the target, which could be an AI model, for example, and then using that for whatever workflow that may be. So that type of motion, if you don't simplify it enough, you just won't do it because the pipeline won't be reliable. It'll just break, and the whole solution falls apart. So that's why we invest quite a bit in that area of really getting to the point where our data pipelines are fully automated from the point of view of infrastructure management or lack of need to manage infrastructure, as well as to the point of being able to automatically adapt as data changes. So we know schema evolves over time. We know
Right.
That we need to be able to also make sure that the data accuracy stays always intact with a process that may break in the middle of the data pipeline. So as you resume the next time you run your data pipelines, how do you make sure that the full data set moved on without duplication? So all those things are things that we really emphasize when we think about how we simplify data pipelines and the whole kind of value chain of data development for our users.
Yeah, and the value chain is what it's all about, right? I mean, data is not the end in and of itself. Data is fuel to drive business processes. And I think for data orchestration to be truly effective and robust, you need to have all these opportunities. You need to have ETL, you need to have ELT, and CDC is the most elegant of them all. And it's kind of interesting because Change Data Capture is not new. It's been around for like 35, 40 years, right? But if you do it correctly, it's the leanest way to move just the data that's needed at just the time that it's needed to keep the systems hydrated, keep the systems refreshed, right, Ariel?
Exactly. And to your point, it's not easy to get right. It's it's been around for many, many years, but we started our journey with an open source library. We thought it'd be very easy to implement that into our product and roll out CDC capabilities for our users, and quickly realized that it doesn't scale. It's not as reliable and as trustworthy as we thought it would be, and we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and redesign our own proprietary CDC engine. It's quite a task to make that a robust workflow, and I think data engineers appreciate that and understand the complexity behind it.
Yeah, and you want it to be bulletproof. That's the key, right? I mean, these things do break. Everything breaks. Containers will go bad. You have to knock them over and move on to the next one. So you want these to be as robust as possible. And again, the open source stuff is great for trying things out, for playing around and like testing ideas and like trying to get off the ground. But if you want to scale, that's where the platform comes into play, right, Ariel?
Exactly, and I think that's part of the you asked me earlier about the journey from Rivery to Boomi. That's part of our excitement around joining Boomi. So being able to really take it to the next level with the rest of what the platform offers. So we brought the data pipelines, but now we can really leverage that for agentic AI, which we all understand now is not the future anymore. It's the current. So being able to get there with that platform is really what excites us.
Yeah. And you have to just pay close attention. I mean, not just lean teams, obviously for a lean team, it's especially true, but even larger teams, just pay attention to what you're spending your time on, right? Because there's an opportunity cost if you're just keeping the engines running, if you're spending all your time fixing broken pipelines, that's a problem. If you have all these tickets, I mean, that's why data engineers get so frustrated because they're trying to get things done and they keep running into hurdles, pipelines go down. You look at the explosion of observability that we've seen in the last like half decade. It was like 5 years ago when it really started, and I credit a lot of that to Kubernetes. Kubernetes comes along and it's just it's almost like sideswiped traditional ways of thinking about things, but it also opened up all sorts of challenges around security, around governance, around process. And someone joked the other day, if AGI does come around, maybe the first thing it'll do is explain to us how Kubernetes works. I thought that was pretty funny because it is very, very complicated, right? So the key is, yes, it's good to play around with things, but if you want to scale, that's the story for the platform. If you have a platform, you're going to have the stability, the endurance, and your team, the morale. I always say morale is the most important quotient of any organization because when morale is high, good things happen. When it's low, bad things happen. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on the show, yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, with an all-star cast from Boomi and RSM. Boomi World, it's right around the corner. It's in Dallas, Fort Worth. Hope to see you all there. We'll have DM Radio on site, talking to some of the movers and shakers in the field. And I wanted to dive into this whole concept of real time. Of course, real time usually means near real time, but you want it as fast as possible, especially for these agentic workloads. You want them working on the latest and the greatest data that they have. So maybe I'll throw it over to Manny for this one. How crucial is that to have timeliness and to have a bias toward recency in your models, at least when you need it to be there, like customer service, for example, or ticket resolution? You want to know what's the latest. That's what's important, right, Manny?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I kind of covered this previously where I think of this as data that we need to, one, answer the question, and two, take action, right? So resolve ticket in your example. So first is understand the problem. Second is resolve the issue. And then when we think about real time, we also need to understand our context around us, right? So how does this customer feel? Is this customer been through a good experience, a bad experience. What products are they using? What have they recently done with us, right? And so there's the contextual plus there's the actual, and yeah, having access to this data in real time or near real time becomes important. Otherwise, you may be a little tongue in cheek, but answering a question that was relevant yesterday versus today.
Right. Right. That's not good for customer experience. That's not good for
No.
ticket resolution. It's not good for anything. And it's not new. I mean, you think about user manuals or just, trying to search and find out how do I get this application working again? And what's one of the biggest problems? You get old instructions, like go into the file menu, then go to this item, like, it's not there. Like, what are they talking about? Because it's outdated. And being outdated is no bueno. Interesting side fact I heard the other day. Stack Overflow, it's been one of the most prominent sites to go for information about technical issues. Half their traffic disappeared because people are using ChatGPT. So this is a straw in the wind, folks. I mean, these engines are powerful and they're getting better. I mean, they really are getting better by the day at finding things, at then being able to cite their sources, et cetera. So it's important, and it comes in handy. Maybe Ariel, I'll throw this one over to you. Staying on this topic of real time, how do you make sure that your pipelines are getting the right data to the right agents? What's that monitoring side all about? I'm guessing that's what the control tower is going to be about, but tell us about the importance of being able to monitor and make sure that the right data is getting to the right place.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned the Stack Overflow traffic shifting toward ChatGPT. I think that's a great example to explain the importance of the real-time delivery, because if you remember, it wasn't that long ago, but again, things are moving so quickly. But at the beginning, ChatGPT was not updated till the
Right.
current day. You had to
Right.
kind of keep in the
Right.
back of your mind, oh, ChatGPT is only trained up until what was it, 2023 at some point. And so you knew if the data is more recent, then you couldn't rely on ChatGPT for that type of use case. And that's a great example, I think, to again emphasize the importance of that real-time data delivery. And so from our point of view, being able to really deliver that data in the right time, not just in the right time, but also in the right format is critical. That's where we tie it back into the orchestration point that we talked about earlier, and the importance of being able to observe those workflows. So it's not just about being able to automate them very, very quickly to satisfy the business needs, but it's also about being able to make sure that they are constantly working, delivering the right data, and when there's a problem, to be alerted, so you can respond to it. And that's I think that's important principles for us is giving that oversight end to end as the data flows with the workflow.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And observability, I mentioned it earlier. Maybe I'll throw this over to Manny. Observability is so important these days for being able to head things off at the pass, basically, knowing that an access point has gone down, an API is stalling, for example, because that helps you avoid troubles downstream, right? People are making decisions, agents are making decisions. That's the thing, right? Agents are making decisions autonomously on what to do, how to stitch things together. And the agents can call LLMs. Like, that's one of the more amazing things here is they can call in an LLM. How do I connect with this API? Gets the information, writes the code, go connect to that sucker. That used to take days. And it's not really fun stuff either, right? I mean, it can be fun if you're a coder and you really enjoy doing that kind of stuff. But man, if the agents can do it, I've always believed that if a machine can do a better job than a person, let the machine do the job, and the person kind of revolves around that. We saw that in agriculture, for crying out loud. You don't see too many people just like using a hoe to try to work on these huge fields. No, it's industrialized, and that's what we're dealing with today. But that observability stuff is really important. Can you talk about how you observe the behavior of agents and how you correct them if they get offline? Go ahead, Manny.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think if you just take the example that you outlined where the LLM is making a lot of these decisions, right? And so the LLM may make a decision how to go about reasoning and answer that question differently every time it's called, right? So, at one point it might decide, "Hey, I could write some code to answer that question, right? Write some code, execute that code. In other contexts, it could take a different path. So from an observability perspective, it's important to understand the path that the agent took.
Right.
And so part of it is the path that the agent took, and then based on the path, it's going to either write some code, get access to data. And so I believe the best practice is to start with the agent. And we did this in the BI world, mid 2000s, where we started to introduce lineage and impact analysis right within the business intelligence environment. And so what it did is it empowered the user of the analytics to be able to understand where that data is coming from. And that becomes really important as you think about the agentic world, is you need to start from the agent, because from the agent, then you can observe what path that agent took. And then based on that path, what data it accessed and the memory it accessed and how it made its decision. So there's that whole chain, but providing an easy way for users to understand what the agent actually did. And we realized that kind of upfront, and that's where the whole control tower capability came in, where we see there's going to be different personas that will want to understand not just the developer who's testing it, but the actual business users who are using this to be able to see the trace, to be able to observe how it's making its decisions, what pathways it's taking. And then clearly we still have the same opportunity and issues with just data observability, right? So when the agent is calling on that tool or that data pipeline, what decisions and where did that data come from? So I think that's traditional. I mean, there will be more velocity that's happening because these pipelines are getting called and data is flowing at a different rate because agents versus humans are asking for that data at a different different rate and velocity. But that's probably something Ariel could get deeper into with what we're trying to do with Rivery as well.
Yeah, Ariel, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're trying to push observability into, and we touched upon it a little bit earlier when we talked about ROI of our investment in data, is really being able to see not just the health of our processes, but also how much they consume and what's the impact of that. I think as we look at as the pace of innovation and there's so many workflows happening, what's hard to often keep track of is what's the impact from a consumption perspective, as a lot of the services we depend on our consumption base. And so when we look at the observability, we try to really bring it back into a not just being able to govern the processes from an access and health perspective, but also from a consumption, a monitoring perspective, and making sure that we are able to optimize and contain our process accordingly.
Yeah. And you guys got me thinking here. One of the coolest aspects, I think, of agentic AI, and get back to this hyper accelerated period of innovation, is that the agents will try different things, and some things will work better than others. And if you can track what they did and how they did it, well, guess what? You're learning how to do things in better ways because the agents are learning how to do things in better ways. This is not an old practice. I mean, one of the cool parts about machine learning and AI is that you do scan processes, you track and monitor and see what works well. When you find something that works well, then you pass it over and you make it sort of a standard, a best practice. And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, and we're going to see that a heck of a lot more, and we'll talk about this maybe in the final segment of our show today. But learning from the agents is going to be really profound because you'll figure out new ways of doing things because the agents figured it out, and then they can share that amongst each other. It'll join their beliefs, if you will, in their little entities out there. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here in the show. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh, with an all-star cast from Boomi and RSM. We're talking about preparing your data, future-proofing your data for agentic AI. And as Ariel said at the top of the hour here, it's not the future, it's the present. These agents are out there. They're working right now today. They're doing amazing things. There is emergent behavior, as folks have talked about. But I wanted to get into what we're just discussing here, which is like, how do you jump on the train? Maybe I'll throw this one over to Manny, and then we'll bring Jason back into the conversation. How do you know when you're ready? Because sometimes you're not ready. So what are some of the hallmarks? What do you look for to know, okay, our house is in order. Let's jump on the AI train. What's your advice there, Manny, for basically getting boards to do a gut check.
Yeah, I almost think that, back to Ariel's point is the future is now. We have to accelerate and be ready. Obviously, so sequencing, I think of this as getting off the starting blocks, but sequencing the type of projects that we pick, because part of it just becomes a cultural, how do we learn from, not only the AI, but how do we learn from the projects that we embark on? And at Boomi, our IT department kind of took a leadership perspective on this, where they started with probably the most obvious place to start was, hey, how do we create a chat GPT type of interface for our employees, right?
Right.
Because as we know, I mean, it's the fastest growing product ever, right? And so if we can't enable that for our own users in a secure fashion, so, different implementing it internally versus externally, because internally you want to feed it the data that's contextual to your business, but you don't want that data flowing into the ether as well.
Right.
But getting started at the right place for the organization, I think that's step one. I think then step two is not saying, hey, we need to sit down and get all of our data quality right and all of our data pipelines right. We've been here already for 35 years, right? So we'll be here for another set of years, even though AI is helping us with data management in general, whether it's data quality or, so I would actually, put a vote in for folks to look at generative AI to help with data pipelines and data quality as well, to accelerate that. But pick the use cases, pick the agents that you need to create that are going to help accelerate, add value, and then identify and activate the data that is required. Make sure that you're comfortable with that data and iterate from there. I think that's the way, but I think the future is now. I think that agentic is here. The technologies have evolved to a point where we understand them, we can feel comfortable, we can run them in our environments, and we can there's tools to understand what they are actually doing, so we can feel confident in the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, and confidence is huge. I'll throw this over to Jason. I've thought a lot about this, and I've been in this industry a long time. And in the data industry, if a business user has a bad experience and gets bad data from a system, guess what? They're not going back to that system. I mean, it's like once burned, 5 times shy, basically. So
Yeah.
I'll throw this over to you, Jason. Like, what do organizations need to do to future-proof their data orchestration to withstand the burden of feeding these AI pipelines?
Well, I think some of it starts at, testing. Like, let's say to Manny's point, you've got your use case, you know where you're going, and you know what you want to do. Do you have a robust testing and monitoring infrastructure that's put into place to ensure that your consumer is having a good output? So think about the ways that you're testing, the data that's going to be needed for that testing, the pipelines that you're building, and all of the applications that are producers of that data. Um, Put all of those things together and really just make sure that you have a testing strategy, whether you're doing something that's more towards machine learning, where you're doing like maybe like K-fold, or you're doing leave out, or you're doing split testing or something like that, because you want to make sure that there's not drift, or you're off a certain standard deviation in your statistical models, or if you're doing large language models and you want to do human interaction testing, or you want to do robustness testing where you're introducing a lot of noise to your data. Like, you really have to think about that, in order to have a successful implementation. So I really, we talk to our clients a lot, is you're going to go to AI, and you need to focus on those things that are going to give you the most value, but you need to ensure that you're doing a good job and making sure that the models that you're putting into place are going to be successful. And
Mm.
that's one way to just really make sure that you're in a good place when you go live and people are starting to use the outputs.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And maybe Ariel, I'll throw it over to you. We got a few minutes left here. The infrastructure, that's always part of the plan here. Any comments on making sure your infrastructure is AI ready?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about the pace of innovation and how quickly things are changing. I think that's one area, but maybe there's a constant around the same concept that apply for analytics. If you want to leverage data analytics, you need infrastructure that supports the right data quality, the right data reliability, enabling you to really trust the data and put it to use towards decision making analytics is exactly the same concept applied for AI readiness. Really, the same old garbage in, garbage out statement holds true here as well. And we really need to make sure that we have all of that in order before or in alignment with the way we use data for AI. The other piece that needs to be thought about when we think about AI readiness is I think we see additional type of data sources that we may need to be able to ingest and include as we think about putting AI to use. If in the past we were okay with a limited set of data sources that we ingested towards our analytics use cases, maybe now we need to consider additional data sources that we need to bring in to really fully orchestrate the AI workflows and agentic AI solutions. So I think that's the area that maybe you need to look at within your data infrastructure, how easy it is for you to onboard new data sources, how easy it is for you to handle changing data types. That's kind of the challenge that I think comes up maybe in a bit of a different way comparing to the way we typically did analytics.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'll throw a bit of a curveball at you guys as we're down to our last couple of minutes. Maybe Jason, I'll throw it over to you first. I had this epiphany a few weeks ago thinking about the evolution of our industry and of information systems. And of course, the database has always been the foundation. And over the past 45, 50 years or so, we've worked on making databases faster, bigger, more performant, being able to have more concurrent users, more connectors. But you know what was never, ever, ever in question? Accuracy, quality. You would always, it was table stakes. You would always get out of the database what you put in the database. It's just a question of how fast you got it, basically. And then all of a sudden, Gen AI comes along, and it's like throwing a noise filter on the end of this long, pristine workflow. And so it's like, guys, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is the example. But don't you think that's kind of profound that all of a sudden we have this? And the reason we're trying to use it is because it's so powerful. These LLMs are incredibly powerful. They're amazingly versatile in what they can do and what they can learn. They learn things that they weren't even trained on. So, but just final thoughts from you, Jason, on what you think about all that?
Well, as a master data management leader here at RSM, any kind of data management is close to my heart. And I think that I just caution all organizations, you have to really think about it at every step of the data lifecycle. Really look at your data lifecycle from its, like if you're looking at customer, how are you onboarding customers? Like maybe you're using a CRM and how you take it from opportunity to lead to account, and then you push that into your ERP to do invoicing. And then eventually, like maybe you're in Europe and you have GDPR, and I have to delete that customer. And then how do you make sure that if there's multiple modes for customers to be onboarded, you're not getting that duplication, you're not getting the noise because people put Jonathan Smith, John Smith, and Johnny Smith, even though they're all the same people. So you really have to think, you really have to have a program in place, and you have to use tools. There's a lot of technology out there, and Boomi's one of those leaders, to be able to really understand where your data is coming from, what the cleanliness is, what the accuracy is, and make sure it's part of your kind of like everyday business tasks to have oversight and accuracy conversations so that you keep up with it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We got about 60 seconds left in our show today, and we got a good question from an audience member. I'll throw it over to Manny. What is the role of ontologies and taxonomies in agentic AI, and any recommendations you have there for best practices? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you get into real enterprise scenarios with agents, so outside of the, hey, I've got this chatbot, I want to research or do something. When we get into industry related related topics, like I mentioned supply chain before, and we need to take a set of tables that are coming from SAP as an example, And we need to organize them so that the agents can actually communicate back and forth with them reliably with.
Right.
That's where ontologies and taxonomy and knowledge, and you mentioned, GraphRag, etc., that can front end that. That's where those capabilities really start to shine, and virtualization. So I know we're a little short on time, but I could go on for a little more longer as it relates to this topic. But I think it hits to the heart of solving real kind of industry related problems and an opportunity. Whereas, taxonomies, ontologies have been around for a long, long time, but now an opportunity to use those in a meaningful fashion with agents and giving them context is this is kind of the next frontier, I believe.
Well, I think you're exactly right. Well, folks, so what a fantastic show today. Big thanks to our friends from Boomi and also RSM. Look these gentlemen up online on LinkedIn. And I hope to see you in Dallas, Texas. Boomi World is coming. The agentic era is here, folks. It's not the future, it's today. And the longer you wait to jump on this train, the more distance there will be between you and your competitors in the wrong way. So you want to stay on top of that. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@insideanalysis.com or info@dmradio.biz. Both come straight to me. Talk to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.